It was a cold November night in 1966 when two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, with their friend Steve and Mary Millette, decided to take a drive through the back roads of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the kind of quiet town where nothing much ever happens, until something did that changed the place forever. They turned onto an old dirt path near the abandoned TNT plant, a World War II munitions site that had long been left to rot, its concrete domes now swallowed by weeds and shadows. And just when they thought it would be fun to explore, the headlights of their car cut across the dark and landed on something so unnatural, so terrifying, that they could barely believe their eyes. There, standing by the roadside, was a massive figure, at least 6 or 7 feet tall, with wings tucked against its sides like a grotesque angel, and glowing red eyes that burned like coals in the dark, eyes that locked onto them as if it could see straight into their souls. Frozen with fear, they barely had time to process before the creature suddenly unfurled its enormous wings, each one stretching wider than the car itself, and with a sound like leather tearing, it lifted off the ground and swooped toward them, making the car shake as Linda screamed for Roger to hit the gas, the tires skidding against gravel as the creature took flight, keeping pace with them in the air as they sped down the road. No matter how fast Roger drove, pushing the old Chevy to nearly 100 miles per hour, the winged thing glided effortlessly alongside, its glowing eyes fixed on them, sometimes diving low enough that its shadow swallowed the car, sometimes vanishing into the treetops only to reappear seconds later, closer and closer, until it felt like death itself was playing with them. Hearts pounding, they finally made it back to town, screeching to a stop outside the local Dairyland drive-in, where they stumbled out and tried to catch their breath, their voices shaking as they told anyone who would listen about what they had just seen. But in a place like Point Pleasant, who would believe for young kids spinning a story about a monster with wings and glowing eyes? Yet the fear in their faces, the raw panic in their voices, was enough to make people uneasy. And as word spread the next morning, whispers started moving through the town like wildfire. Something was out there in the dark hills of West Virginia, something that didn't belong to this world. And before long, others would come forward to say they had seen it too. By the next day, the story of the terrifying night had spread across Point Pleasant like a fever, whispered in gas stations, rattled in classrooms, and nervously debated over coffee in the diner downtown. And while some laughed it off as kids pulling a prank, others weren't so quick to dismiss it, because this wasn't the first time strange things had been reported near the TNT area. People had long talked about odd lights in the sky, eerie sounds echoing from the woods. And now, with the Scarberries and the Millettes swearing on their lives about what they saw, the quiet town couldn't ignore it anymore. Then came more sightings, one after another, as if the creature had decided to reveal itself to the entire community. A man driving late at nights where something with huge wings swooped down onto his roof, nearly driving him off the road. A woman living near the river claimed she saw a giant shadow hovering outside her window, its red eyes glowing through the glass. And hunters whispered about finding dog tracks that suddenly stopped in the middle of a field, replaced by strange bird-like imprints too large for any known animal. Each new report adding to the growing fear that something beyond explanation was haunting the town. Soon, newspapers picked it up, headlines screaming about a man-sized bird terrorizing Point Pleasant, and reporters came rushing in, asking endless questions and leaving the townsfolk both curious and horrified that their sleepy little community had suddenly become the center of America's strangest mystery. But what unnerved people the most wasn't just the creature's size or its glowing eyes. It was the way witnesses described the feeling of pure dread that came over them, as if their bodies froze, and their hearts sank the moment they laid eyes on it, as if the creature wasn't just something they saw, but something that reached deep inside them and pressed down on their very souls. Skeptics called it hysteria, saying once one story got out, others imagined things in the dark. But believers insisted the fear was too real, too visceral to be explained away. And in hushed voices, people began asking dangerous questions. Was it a demon? Some cursed spirit tied to the TNT plant, or could it be something not of this earth at all? A being that slipped into our world from somewhere else. What made it worse was that strange lights were being reported in the skies above Point Pleasant. At the same time, bright orbs and streaks of fire darting across the horizon at night, leaving people to wonder if the two were connected, and whether the winged figure stalking the roads was just a small piece of a much larger nightmare. Mothers kept their children inside after dark men carried shotguns on night drives, and every pair of glowing eyes in the woods, whether from an owl or a raccoon, sent shivers down spines, because no one could shake the thought that somewhere out there in the shadows, the Mothman was waiting, watching, its crimson eyes burning with an intelligence that felt not just animal, but deliberate, as if it wanted to be seen, as if it wanted the people of Point Pleasant to know it was among them, and that whatever it represented was only just beginning. As the weeks passed, Point Pleasant found itself drowning in terror. Because the sightings didn't stop, they multiplied, each story more unnerving than the last, and one night a group of volunteer firefighters claimed they saw a giant bird-like figure soaring above the treetops, its wings stretching wider than a car, its eyes glowing like burning embers. And though they were men used to danger, every single one admitted they felt an unnatural dread. That made them want to drop their flashlights and run. Then there was the family who lived on the outskirts of town, the Partridges, who heard a noise outside one evening, and when they looked toward their barn, they saw its red eyes glaring back at them, unblinking higher than any man could stand, and as they stared frozen with fear, their beloved German Shepherd ran toward the darkness, barking wildly only to vanish into the trees and never return. The next morning his chain was found snapped and his tracks ended abruptly, as if he had been lifted straight into the air, leaving the family shaken and devastated, whispering that the creature had taken their dog. Rumors spread that the Mothman was more than a monster, that it was an omen, a harbinger of doom, appearing before tragedy struck, and each new witness felt the weight of that possibility pressing on their chest like a curse. People described the same sensations again and again, paralyzing fear, an overwhelming sense that they were being watched, and sometimes even piercing headaches and ringing in their ears when the creature was near, like its presence distorted the very air around it. Others said they dreamed of it before they ever saw it, waking up in the dead of night drenched in sweat, only to encounter the winged figure days later on a lonely road, as if it had chosen them in advance. And while skeptics in town still laughed, calling it hysteria or a misidentified owl, the sheer number of encounters was impossible to ignore. Hundreds of reports came pouring in between November and December of 1966. Too many for it to be coincidence, too many for it to be a simple trick of the light. Then came the most chilling sighting yet, when a group of young people parked near the TNT plant late one night swore they saw the creature crouched on top of one of the old concrete domes, its wings folded tight against its back, watching them with those blazing eyes until, with a sudden movement, it launched into the sky and let out a sound that none of them could forget. A shrieking metallic screech that echoed through the trees and rattled their bones. They sped away, hearts pounding. But one of them later admitted he just hear the sound, he felt it inside his head, as if the creature had screamed directly into his mind. Fear was no longer enough to describe what was happening in Point Pleasant, because now it felt like the town was living under siege by something beyond human understanding, something that could appear whenever it wanted, wherever it wanted, and no matter how far you ran, no matter how many lights you kept on at night, you could never shake the feeling that out there in the darkness, the Mothman was watching, waiting, feeding on the terror it left behind. By the time December 1967 rolled around, Point Pleasant was no longer the quiet town it once had been. People lived in a state of constant dread, locking their doors at night, refusing to drive past the TNT plant after sunset, and whispering about strange things in the skies. Because it wasn't just the Mothman anymore. It was glowing orbs darting across the horizon, strange men in black suits showing up at people's doors warning them to keep silent, and phones ringing with nothing but high-pitched noises on the other end. all of it creating an atmosphere so thick with paranoia that folks felt like they were being stalked by forces they couldn't fight or understand. The Mothman itself was seen almost daily, sometimes perched on rooftops, sometimes crouched in fields, and sometimes chasing cars down Highway 62, its crimson eyes burning like warnings no one could decode, and many began to believe it wasn't here to kill, but to foretell that every sighting was a message of something darker looming on the horizon. Linda Scarberry, one of the original witnesses, claimed she was plagued with nightmares, seeing the winged creature standing at the foot of her bed, unable to scream or move, while others described premonitions of disaster, dreams of collapsing structures, screams in the distance, and water swallowing everything in sight, all of which seemed impossible to explain, but eerily connected to what was about to come. On cold winter nights, drivers reported seeing the Mothman hovering near the Silver Bridge, the massive steel span that linked Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, its skeletal frame groaning under decades of use. And though no one paid much attention at the time, later they would remember the chilling detail of those sightings, the creature as red eyes fixed not on them, but on the bridge itself, as if it knew its time was running out. People tried to carry on with their lives, but fear had woven itself into the fabric of the town, the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. And when December 15th arrived, a bitterly cold day, with snow dusting the streets, traffic on the Silver Bridge backed up with holiday shoppers heading home, no one could have guessed the nightmare waiting to unfold. Yet in the hours before the collapse, multiple witnesses swore they saw a shadowy figure with wings perched high on the bridge's towers, moving against the gray sky, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. And though some dismissed it as hysteria or rumor, others would go to their graves convinced that the Mothman had been there, silently watching, its presence a final chilling omen of the disaster about to strike. On the evening of December 15, 1967, as holiday traffic crowded the Silver Bridge, no one sensed the catastrophe waiting just minutes ahead. Cars lined bumper to bumper across the icy Ohio River, headlights glowing against the early winter darkness, families humming along to Christmas songs on the radio, workers eager to get home, when suddenly, without warning, a sound like the cracking of a giant bone tore through the night, and the bridge shuddered violently beneath them. In a matter of seconds, one of the suspension chains snapped, a steel beam twisted like paper, and the entire structure began to ripple and fold, plunging cars, trucks, and buses into the freezing black water below, screams mixing with the groan of metal and the roar of the collapsing span. And in that moment of chaos, survivors swore they saw something in the sky, a massive black shape rising above the wreckage, its wings spread wide as if in triumph or mourning, its red eyes glowing through the snow and smoke. Before vanishing into the night, 46 lives were lost that evening, swallowed by the river in one of America's worst bridge disasters. And while engineers later blamed a small defect in a single eye-bar chain for the collapse, the people of Point Pleasant could not shake the feeling that there was more to it, that the Mothman's appearance had not been coincidence but prophecy, an omen no one had understood until it was too late. After that night, the sighting stopped almost completely, as if the creature had fulfilled its purpose and moved on, leaving behind only grief, questions, and a legend that would never die. And for decades to come, locals would still speak in hushed tones about what they had seen, some insisting the Mothman was a messenger trying to warn them, others believing it was a curse that fed on tragedy. But no matter the theory, one truth remained: Point Pleasant had been marked forever, down to the winged shadow that appeared in the winter of '66, haunted a town for 13 months, and disappeared the very night disaster struck. Today, tourists come to the town for festivals, statues, and souvenirs. But the locals know better. They remember the fear, the dreams, the red eyes in the dark, and late at night when the river is quiet and the wind rushes over the bridge that replaced the fallen one. Some still look to the sky half expecting to see wings spread wide against the moonlight, wondering if the Mothman is gone forever or if one day, when another disaster looms, those burning crimson eyes will return to remind us that we are never truly alone in the dark.